Good morning, good afternoon. Hello. So welcome to our physical inventory panel. This is our last free webinar that is part of our Asset Management Awareness Month. So thank you to everybody who's been repeat attenders. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Again, if you guys wanted to see any information in regards to the month or any of the things that happened or any of our chapter highlights or our member highlights, you guys can go ahead and go to www.amtma.org/AMAM. So with that being said, I just want to point out a couple things. We are recording this panel. Hey, Tom, you might want to put yourself on mute right now just because there's some feedback and I think it's kind of overlapping with me. Maybe. Okay. All right. So I apologize for that. So yes, it will be recorded. All of the webinars were actually recorded and they will be posted at some point in time. So just be aware of that. The next thing that I wanted to point out is just because this is a panel, we wanted to have it be pretty dynamic. So you guys are more than welcome to go ahead and enter in questions at any point in time during the presentation. And we will have a couple stopping points that allow us to go ahead and take the questions and answer them rather than just waiting until the very end of it. So with that being said, I'm just going to do a brief introduction and I'm going to pass it over. So this panel will be moderated by Scott Ray from Stanford. And then our three panelists are Brandon Kreiner from Sunflower Systems, Tom Ruckdashel, who is an independent consultant for InterChi, and Professor Chuck Wozniak, who is from GP Consultants. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to do this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth installment of Asset Management Awareness Month's free webinar series. I'm joined today by three very distinguished guests who are serving on our physical inventory panel. These guests all come with numerous years of experience. The type of guest where you would just want to sit down and say, go, and let's hear some stories, and I'm sure there'd be a ton of stories to share. I do have some brief intros for each, and just before I get to that, I'd just like to remind you to please, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in. I will be trying to allocate time as we go through here to get those questions answered, because in my opinion, as part of doing a panel, a lot of it's driven from the questions in the audience, and I don't want to leave that to the very end. I think we could definitely determine what direction and how we go about our panel today based on your questions. So certainly don't hesitate to ask. With that, I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing our panel. I have a slide prepared here with some photos, because it's always good on a webinar to at least have a name to a face, at least virtually. So with that,
Hey, Scott, it looks like you may have just muted yourself. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. So let me start over. I'd like to go ahead and, starting from our left to our right, introduce our three panelists. Brandon Kreiner, he's currently, as you all likely know, is our MPMA National President. He has experience working for Sunflower currently as a director. He has also worked for Northrop Grumman as the Director of Property Management, as well as Harris Corporation in two roles, as an asset manager and a senior manager. Plenty of years of experience, especially when it comes to inventory, based on the information that I was able to pull up here. Second in line, right in the middle, Mr. Tom Ruckdashel. Mr. Ruckdashel has multiple years of experience, He's worked for the Undersecretary of Defense in a senior procurement analyst, staff officer role. He was the deputy director of the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA, and then his last position with the government in federal service was with the Office of Undersecretary of Defense Acquisition Technology and Logistics. He was a accountability specialist. He retired. Congratulations, Mr. From federal service in 2017, and currently is an independent consultant with Interchi LLC. And then last, but certainly not least, Mr. Professor Charles Wozniak. Professor Wozniak is a 15-year member of the NPMA. He is also a certified professional contracting manager. He is a DoD Acquisition Corps member. He has been a professor for the Air Force Institute of Technology, the Defense Acquisition University, where he still participates and holds trainings, and developed and presented the government contract property related curricula to attendees at the 53rd and 56th annual seminar on government contracts. So plethora of experience here, so certainly get those questions started. And I'd like to go ahead and thank our panel for agreeing to do this with me today. And I think the best place to kind of start is just with a simple question, and we can kind of see where it goes. Since Brandon, you are in my home state, just a couple hours north of where I am, I'll go ahead and start with you. In your opinion, why is performing an inventory important?
Yeah, Scott, I think it's very important because, number one, it's a requirement in the FAR, so we don't really have a choice. Number two, even if we didn't have a requirement, I still think as asset managers, we need to be able to make sure that we actually have the assets that we think we have, and we need to understand the asset portfolio that our organizations are managing, both from a physical and financial accountability standpoint. So performing a physical inventory is really the primary way to validate that.
And Tom, in your opinion, inventory, I mean, you've had a lot of experience at different levels, and being part of DCMA, same question to you.
I was going to say, Brandon said it. Can everybody hear me, just to make sure?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I think Brandon said it really well. I'll add one thing. It validates what you're doing. In physical inventory, the practice, it's rather unique in that it's in and of itself an internal control, and it's part of a larger set of internal controls. And it basically validates everything you do. And what I kind of like about it is there's so many different ways to do it, so many different practices that you can do, depending on the size and scope of your company, or if you're a federal agency, of your agency. So that's why I think it's important. It validates counts and quantities, and it validates your records, and if done properly, can really add a lot of value to your organization. Everybody there?
Oh, we're here.
I'm sorry, I accidentally muted myself again. I will not do that the rest of the time.
Hey, Scott, if you can't handle this, we can.
Oh, thank you. I'll do my best. I will do my best from here on out.
It's really a check. It's sort of a check of everything. If you whatever you've done during the year can be revealed, good or bad, on the results of your physical inventory.
So, Professor Wozniak, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I'd like to expound and expand upon what both Brandon and Tom talked about with regard to what drives or compels the need for an inventory. Now, the listening audience needs to understand that my background is a contracting background. I've spent a lot of years now on government property, and I've been able to work with some of the finest people in the world, not only within NPMA, but also Getz, Pachork. So I've got good background there. But the contract, let's start with the contract. Remember, and Brandon touched on that a little bit. It's like, okay, well, what does the contract say? Well, but wait a second. It's not just what the contract says, generally speaking, and I'll touch on that, but more specifically, you know, as we get into fire requirements, is your contract going to state that you've got to take and be paid for, perhaps, special type inventories? So what does your contract say relative to a specific time or nature or type of inventory? Then you get to the generalities, which would be contained in the -1 clause, and specifically the property management clause. But let's not just stop there, because if we're talking about business systems, the material management system also is going to have requirements for inventory. But then, and Brandon again and Tom touched on this, just from the standpoint of general business practices, not only what the contract says, but more importantly, just from the standpoint of being in business, does it make good sense to be able to account for your assets? Over to you.
So, I guess the next question I had was and I'm not, and being a university person, I'm still really getting my feet under me when it comes to understanding all of the different regulations, because I don't necessarily see them all the time. But along those lines of, I'm sorry? Oh, I thought I heard feedback. What would you say, and Brandon, I'm going to toss this over to you, the importance of communication? And I know that we've all touched inventory at various different levels and from different perspectives, but the one thing I found, at least in our community here, is that communication is super important. Would you agree and have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I certainly would agree. You know, communicating, number one, you know, when you're doing the inventory, what areas will be affected, why you're doing the inventory, you know, who needs to cooperate and participate in the inventory. And then, of course, when you're trying, you know, getting down to the end and trying to reconcile those last few items, communicating with the stakeholders of those items to, you know, to help reconcile them is very important. So communication's very important at all stages of the process.
And Tom, in your experience, I'm sure this is really important as well, being or leading leading DCMA for so many years. What can you, anything you'd like to add to that, and on the importance of communication?
Well, obviously the importance of communication. When I think of communication, I think of contract terms. To me, if it's not in the contract, that's you got an issue. But what I see, I'm going to just rephrase the question a little bit. So
sure.
Maybe I want to go where I want to go. There's a lot of emphasis on physical inventories right now. Chuck brought up fire, which is true. Which, if you don't know what that is, that's the financial improvement and audit readiness effort that DoD has, which ties to the CFO Act and so forth. But what I see and what I observed before I retired, you can see it online too when you read the news stories, especially if you read the recent F-35 story. Yeah, there's an emphasis on inventories, but there's a real emphasis on annual inventories, or wall-to-wall physical inventories. And that suggests to me that people don't understand what the whole point of an inventory is. Because, you know, there's a cartoon a couple of years ago, darn, and I wish I kept it. It was a teenager going to his dad, say, "Dad, I need a car." And the dad turns around and says, "No, you need transportation." And you could talk, and I saw the tie-in with this, because most of the time when the communication says we need you to do a physical inventory, what that really means is we need your data. The inventory is not the issue. It's the whole point is we need the data, and it just kind of defaults into this. Oh, you got to go count everything, and I think that's. I'll be provocative. I think that's incorrect. That's not the point of the inventory. When you say go do an inventory, that implies a 100% wall-to-wall, stop what you're doing, close the doors, don't come out until you're done process. And that's if you're Joe's Machine Shop, that might work. But if you're a large defense contractor, or any kind of company, no one really does that per se. That's usually when things go hopelessly wrong. Most of the time they're doing cyclic inventories or statistical sampling, and all of that is perfectly valid. And if those types of inventories are giving you the results, then I would argue that you can rely on the data. And if you can't rely on the data, then if you're in the DoD world, you've got a business system issue. So hope I didn't pontificate a little bit too much, but that's how I see it. That physical inventory requirement or push is being stretched in a way it was never meant to be stretched. Maybe the Freudian slip. Chuck, what do you go to fire? Let me just throw it over to Chuck. Do you kind of see that with what you're doing in GP Associates?
I'm sorry, repeat.
I was going to say, do you see any of that why in your work with GP Associates that sort of twisting of the inventory requirement into something that perhaps it really wasn't meant to be?
Absolutely. How do I put this? Let's talk about, if you want to talk about the fire requirements, certainly we talk about the requirements to have a process under the -1 clause, and I understand that not all of our listeners are hidebound to having the -1 clause. But a lot of our contractor customers are now driven by the desires of the service agencies to have inventories or conduct inventories gratis, or allow them to come in and conduct inventories in their locations. So from the standpoint that the process of inventory isn't just that which is embodied by the -1 clause, which the contractor does under that process, but rather it also includes what the customer wants, either contractually driven and maybe paid for, or maybe previously required as a result of a fire requirement.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add, and I'm talking too much, is a lot depends on what the item is. Is it a box of paper clips, or is it a chip? So when you throw the go do a physical inventory without explaining what exactly you're looking for, you create sort of a cascade of all kinds of problems and issues that can result from that. And I have to give you an example. I get hooked on the 100% wall-to-wall annual inventory, and some folks say, well, you got to do that at least annually. And one of the things we found out is annual may not be enough, which is why the FAR language is so broad. It's meant to be expandable. We have an example of a jewelry store. We get the inventory their stuff when they open, they do it in midday, and they do it again when they close. 3 times a day, every day. Ammunition, different. Small arms, different. Furniture, way different.
So actually, that just sparked a question in my mind, but it may be because I'm a university person. But you just brought up the fact that this one group was inventorying 3 times a day. So while the FAR kind of states it broadly, I guess contractors are free to interpret that
Well, yeah.
Is that accurate?
Well, yeah. To answer your question is yes. It's meant to be broad so that because we expect contractors to have internal controls anyway, and we don't.
Okay.
And the FAR at such a high level can't contemplate what the property is going to be. But if in DoD, if the military department wants more physical inventory requirements, if they want to define it, they can put it in the contract and say so.
Okay.
That's one of the criticisms. I put criticism, quote unquote, about the FAR language on inventory. That's too broad. Well, it's supposed to be. It's the FAR. It's not wrong. It's supposed to be broad. That way you can tailor it to your needs. The FAR doesn't know what the property is going to be.
I'd like, if I could jump in here, I'd like to say that there are two issues here. Number one is the process-driven requirement for inventory, and then there's the specific requirement for inventory. And what Tom is getting to is the fact that certainly a contractor, given a property management system, has got to have a systemic approach to inventory. You can't inventory everything the same way. It's just illogical, and this is a modern era where we don't have to do that. But more specifically, you know, if there is a specific call out relative to inventory, then that's got to be addressed based upon the specific requirements of what the customer wants. So there's basically got to be a differing, not a differing approach, but you have to be mindful that, hey, all businesses should have an inventory process or procedures that it talks to, you know, communications. We talk about communications. Should certainly address there. But more specifically, if you've got an individual requirement for a specific type of inventory, then that should be laid out contractually and perhaps paid for in the contract. Over.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, it should be based on risk. And Tom is right that inventory is an internal control, and it should really be based on risk. And there's this huge misconception I see out there working with people that the FAR requires an annual inventory. I just hear that over and over again, and that is just not correct. As Tom mentioned, you may need to do it more frequently. You may need to do it less frequently, depending on your environment, what kind of property you're managing, and what else is in your contract. Perfect.
Good point. Very good point.
There's another FAR provision that we don't think about when we think about this. Everybody knows -1, and it says right in there that the contractor has to have a system of internal controls. But take a look at Part 9 every once in a while, which requires contractors to have the necessary organization experience, accounting, and operational controls, including production procedures, property control systems, etc. So there's a broad statement in there that says, contractors, if you expect to participate in this thing we call contracting, we expect you to have a system of internal controls. And inventory is just one of them. And none of the other inventory controls are spelled out. Well, I won't say none. And generally speaking, we allow the contractor broad interpretation on how to construct their inventory and how to construct their internal controls. That's what we pay them to do. So it's kind of awkward to say, well, you know, we expect you to do that, but do the inventory this way. And by the way, if you do the inventory, that's only one contract at a time, right? Because all the other contracts don't have to be inventoried the same way. So it's very awkward to specify a very discrete inventory process. I can see specifics on how to disclose the results or what the results should be and that kind of thing, but I kind of shiver when I hear annual inventories, because that equates to wall, of course. Because annual means you got to do it on January 3rd, right? And finish on the 4th. That's what annual means, once a year. And you do nothing the rest of the year. So it's usually, I see a lot of panic when I see people asking for those annual inventories. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, we should not have an archaic approach to inventory. In other words, perhaps calling it an inventory is binding us to old ways of doing things. Hey, way back when I was a military club steward, every day I had to go out and inventory the bar stock.
Right.
Guess what? Modern technology has supplanted that, so that now you go into a modern bar and that thing is done mechanically. You know,
Right.
So from that standpoint, if we think in terms of just, well, we have to conduct inventory, no, I think we need to think in terms of profit and loss or risk, which was addressed before. Hey, that's why we're doing this, and how frequently it's done depends upon a lot of factors, as Tom indicated. Sensitivity, you know, what's the risk of loss to either the loss of the item, catastrophic mission impact, or catastrophic loss to the profit and loss of a commercial organization.
So I'm gonna touch on something that you just mentioned, and that was folks that are still using, and I'll just use your terms, archaic methods, I guess, as part of their inventories. Is that something that you see happening today? People just doing the process like they were taught to do, but they're kind of missing, they're not up to date, basically. They're kind of, it's not necessarily broken, but it's not necessarily addressing or looking at what they should be looking at when it comes to inventory. And I'll throw that back to Professor Welsdale. Or
Pick one of us.
oh, I just asked you. I just asked you, sir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Absolutely. You know, again, when we talk about archaic, I'm sorry, but coming from a government contract background, the absence of profit and loss to a contractor inhibits businesses from striving to become sleek and economic. And that's one of the better places to look at it is inventory. It's like, why in God's name, with all of the modern technologies out there that you can bring to bear, do you want to go out there and still count things periodically? You know, we've got the necessary tools, and if the businesses were driven by profit and loss more, then they would probably take more and innovative and earlier steps to redefine their inventory process so that it supported their business as opposed to becoming a cost drain. You know, it gets into the Bob McFarland philosophy of is property management a cost driver or a profit center? Over.
And so Brandon, I'm going to loop you into this now. In your experiences coming from the sunflower perspective and before, have you noticed the same thing? Folks still in the Stone Age sort of thing?
I have noticed that, but what I've noticed is it's not, you know, in the case of contract property, it's not contractors necessarily desiring to do that, but their government customers sort of expecting and demanding that. So I think we as an industry are sort.
Brandon, can I just jump in really quick? There's quite a few comments about the feedback that I think is coming from Chuck's phone. So I don't know if he's like on a microphone or he's on a headset, but it's like pretty much ruining any of the comments or feedback that you guys come with that makes it basically like impossible to understand. So can I ask that all of you either mute yourselves until you have something to say, or maybe just check your headphones?
Okay.
There we go.
That sounds a lot better right there. Good. So yeah, a lot of people have kind of commented on it. So I just want to make sure that they're not kind of hanging up just because it's pretty loud. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah. So I guess my point is we as an industry need to kind of all come together on this and you know, stop feeling like the only way to get assurance and reasonable assurance of compliance and location and existence is this wall-to-wall annual manual count. But I see that as what's expected by everybody.
So Danielle, I'm gonna just pause quickly here. Are there any questions from the audience that you've seen come through that we want to ask our panelists?
Yeah. Art Kurland was curious what the -1, well, he said, what is the -1 clause?
Anybody want to take that?
I can take it. That's the Federal Acquisition Regulation Property Clause, and it is 52.245-1. And there is a requirement in there for contractors to take physical inventories periodically and at contract closeout, although there's some exceptions to that.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Danielle?
And then we had another one, which was kind of just more a general comment. So it was the FAR doesn't apply to everyone on the call. We hoped it would be inventory process, not a FAR contracting discussion. So I guess if anybody has any specific questions that they don't feel like are being addressed as far as other sectors of the industry, please feel free to answer questions. I know all of these guys have been involved with inventories in multiple industries. So please ask any questions you guys have if you feel like some of this content is not applicable.
So I'll get to my next question, which I think will kind of go back along those lines a little bit, but and I'm gonna start with Brandon. It maybe has been a while, but approach. What is your approach when it comes to an inventory, or when you have done one in the past? Is there a specific structure that you follow, and if so, kind of what is that approach?
Well, yeah, first you have to define the parameters of the inventory, right? So you have to define the baseline of assets that you're going to go validate. So are you going to go look for everything? Are you going to look for things based on risk or value or other dimensions? And then what are the acceptable ways you're going to validate the inventory? You know, we've talked about the manual way of going and physically laying hands on everything, but there's also other ways, you know, inventory by exception. If something is calibrated, or something is disposed of, or if something is otherwise verified in some way that is legitimate, you can count that towards your inventory, and it doesn't have to be, you know, manually touched. And by manually touched, I'm including, you know, things like barcode scanning in that realm as well. You're still expending physical labor to go lay hands on something. So, you know, defining what you're going to inventory, defining how you're going to inventory it, define when you're going to inventory it, and you have to have some, you know, some end date for the inventory so that you can, you know, validate everything and then reconcile any losses that may occur.
So along those same lines, there may be times where you require additional buy-in to probably execute your inventory, and then two, get folks on board with even probably allowing you access at times, and a lot of times that's not a problem because it's a requirement and it's in the contract. But and I will throw this to I'll start with you, Brandon, then I'll just go to Tom and Chuck here. Have there been times when you've had to kind of manage up in a way to get additional support? And then, if so, what kind of steps did you take to gain that additional support?
Sure, and you know, people often have other things that they're focused on and don't necessarily prioritize physical inventory. You know, one of the things that has always been very effective is, you know, providing a list of things that need to be validated to those people and to their management, and explaining why, you know, either an internal procedural requirement that they be validated, or some external, you know, contract clause or other requirement that they be validated. And you just have to be persistent, and you know, eventually you know, eventually it comes down to we have to validate these things or bad things are going to happen, and that tends to get people's attention.
That's a good point, and that's something that in our environment here at Stanford we are constantly going through is trying to get the inventory. I mean, it happens biannually for us, so we're splitting the university into two halves over 2 years, and it's always a challenge because you're right. People have so many other duties on their plate, and at times it's just hard to get inventory to the forefront of of their thought process there. Tom or Professor Waszak, anything you'd like to add in terms of managing up or having to work with folks to gain additional support?
I'll go first. My first job, well, my first real job, I guess, was as a defense contractor. My job was to physically inventory. Well, my job was to do all the special tooling and this one particular stock room for this one particular program. I never really needed additional resources, if that's what you mean by support. What I did need is, I guess, relationship support. In other words, okay, guys, it's that time of year again. I got to do physical inventory. I'm going to be in your way here for a little bit, and just kind of put up with me, and and building a relationship with the people on the floor who were responsible for the ins and outs of taking those parts in and taking those parts out, and hopefully you don't want them afraid of you. You're there to help them. So that's my observation from my time in actually performing physical inventories. It was more of a matter of building trust in the relationship with the people as opposed to asking for more people.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, because the more trust you build, the more likely they would be to come to you if anything comes up throughout the course of the time between inventories, whether it's a location change or something like that. And building and maintaining those relationships is such a vital part to inventory and property in general. Professor Waszak, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. And I take to heart what the one questioner said asked with regard to the -1 clause, and I appreciate us not vectoring into just the government needs. But let's break this down into three differing approaches here. Number one, government contracts. Number two, a commercial environment. Number three, an academic environment. Who is the one that needs to be, who's got the sensitive belly button? In other words, when in a government contract, compliance with the federal acquisition regulations require to have a process and fulfill that process to have a system approach. Certainly, you can put belly buttons there in the organization and say, look, we need more emphasis on inventory because we won't be non-compliant to the -1 clause. In a commercial environment, a better case can be made that, hey, profit or loss will be affected by our inability or lack of desire to do an inventory. So therefore, a profit and loss approach can take place. In the third instance, where we have an academic, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Tom, I think you're still unmuted. Would you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And in the third case, in an academic environment, it's like, okay, well, what drives the fact that, why would we want to have an inventory or determine frequency? Well, the availability or lack of availability, not being able to lay your hands on it when you need it, locating it. So again, given the varying business structures, government contracting, one vein, commercial approach in another vein, academic community, another vein. Each one of those has sensitive belly buttons or buttons to push with regard to why an inventory, a good inventory, is vital, and it be done accurately and no more frequently or no less frequently than the organization feels they need to conduct one.
So
yeah, then at least back in my day, we simply said manage it the way you do your, inventory it in a way. Assuming there's no contract terms that say differently, manage it in a way that you do for your own stuff.
So along those same lines, we just kind of touched on it a few minutes ago. But in terms of inventory results and data, and being able to analyze the data from your inventory, how can inventory results be used to your advantage in the management process? And I will start with Brandon.
So I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. How can inventory results be used to your advantage in the management process?
Well, certainly, if you are detecting unusual amounts of loss, that can uncover areas of risk in your internal controls or in your property management or other processes. So that's the main area. Of course, if you are getting very good inventory results, it's also evidence that your processes are effective. So I think you can use it for both positive and I don't want to say negative, but encouraging purposes.
Tom, same question.
How can you do that? Well, my first thought was, only the good results give you the advantage, right? But actually, it doesn't matter. Even bad results will tell you something. It could tell you need more people. It could tell you need more resources. It could tell you have a bad property system, or you have it could tell you that somebody is breaking into the stockroom at night. It could tell you a lot of different things. So that data would lead to other data. And in terms of continuous improvement, you could learn that you learn a lot by those physical inventory results. You can learn how good you are, how bad you are. That's kind of a general answer. I'd have to think about it for more to get more specific, but the whole point of the inventory is to prove your internal controls. One thing I think it could do is, assuming you have good internal controls, at some point, if you're federal contractor and property is an evaluation factor on award, you could certainly demonstrate the fact that you have a quote 98% inventory accuracy result, something along those lines that would help you secure an award.
And Professor Wozniak, anything to add to that?
Well, I've always got something to add. I'm never left speechless. But
okay.
Again, if you look at I'll look at a commercial organization where it's far easier to understand the ramifications of an accurate inventory. We used to take our classes up to Meyer Distribution Center, and very imperative. They had a 99.4 or 5% accuracy rate with regard to what they had. Well, like, why are you that accurate? Why do you control it that well? Well, it gets down to profit and loss, and if you lose something, you've got to generate a lot of revenue to replace that. Therefore, it's better not to lose it in the first place. On the other hand, having too much inventory is also a cost on a commercial business. So, a sophisticated, I won't say sophisticated, it depends on the size of the business, but a knowledgeable inventory process suited to the mission requirements of what you do, be that government work, be that commercial work, be that in academia. The ability or inability to lay your hands on something because it's lost, because it's not been ordered, because you've got too many of them. All of those things will be indicators that you've basically got to analyze and say, well, geez, if we did this differently, if we controlled this better, how can we drive costs down or save a cost by not having to replace it, or not inventory as frequently because that hasn't moved in the past 10 years. So there's a lot of indicators that come out of just looking at the organization, what their goals are, and what their needs are relative to what an inventory needs to tell them.
And we constantly in my area here look at that process and try to keep getting new ideas and refining it so that we can constantly be ahead of the curve as best that we can. Danielle, I'm going to pause again. Were there any questions that have come through so far?
Yeah, and I think this one is a pretty good one. She's offline now, so maybe I'll have to try to figure out how to get the answer to her. But what should be included in the inventory results / report for auditing purposes? For example, description, contract numbers, etc.
Tom, do you want to take that? Or are you? I think he's muted and maybe trying to.
Sorry, I was talking to myself.
No problem.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Hold on, I can answer that. We wrote a thing at DCMA called a standard inventory result template, and it went something like this. I'm just trying to bring it up, if you'll excuse me just for a second. And the only reason it never became a rule is we a little awkward to put how to write correspondence in the FAR. But the first thing we said was summary level conclusions. What you did, how you did it, why you did it. The result was something very general, a general kind of narrative. And then you could say that the inventory was accomplished in accordance with what? Well, you got contractor procedures, and you could say chapter 3 of your procedures. Then you can talk about what the methodology you used, wall-to-wall, cycle, cyclic, by exception, whatever. And then dates performed, the start dates and the stop dates, if that's applicable. Now, sometimes when you have an inventory result, like, if you change the oil on the Jeep, that counts as an inventory touch. So you may not have the date of that particular one, but anyway, so you have a start and stop point. And then you indicate when the inventory result was posted to your records. And I would say for equipment, you would post losses, and the inventory adjustments, the material, you would post inventory adjustments. And then a statement that would simply say, records are in agreement except for, and then you would indicate what the exceptions are. And then a statement that says the property loss reports are available for review. And then documentation is available. So something very general like that would be helpful. But that's kind of a standard template. We not a regulation, because it's really just a matter of correspondence, but that was sort of the template we encourage contractors to follow so we can understand their communication. Notice I made two points there. Results for inventory results for material are going to be way different than inventory results for equipment. Okay.
So real quick, before I go to another question, Raquel asked if it was possible to have a copy of the inventory result template. So obviously I cannot answer that, and then I will jump to another question after somebody answers that.
So the template was something that Tom had used. I think we can see if we can get something together. Tom, is that all right? Or
we can come back to it and follow up with that.
Sounds
next
good.
Question. Can you differentiate the expectation for equipment non-consumables? Seemingly the main focus is on material aspects of inventory versus equipment. What are your thoughts?
The inventory results for equipment versus material?
Yep.
Equipment, you're really talking about what a loss is. Is that kind of where we're going? The inventory results are going to be different because, for material, you could have a box of paper clips as opposed to equipment, which is one each kinds of things. Equipment is, and when I say equipment, I also mean tooling and test equipment. It's usually a one each thing. You had one of these, 10 of these, 3 of things, and either you found them or you didn't find them, and that's kind of cut and dry. But material is a little bit different because there's consumable material, there's stuff coming in and out of stock all the time, and those losses are generally more defined as inventory adjustments, assuming they're reasonable, than losses, although you could have both. And if you're really interested, on the MPMA website, there's a briefing I did on losses called When is a Loss a Loss? And that would probably answer your question better than I could in 3 minutes.
Thank you.
And that presentation still holds up, I think.
Danielle, any
So,
other questions?
Yeah, there's some more. So another person kind of asked about the checklist. Is there a checklist per se to reconcile issues that are now visible from the inventory taken, checking packaging slips, purchase orders, etc.?
Brandon or Chuck, do you want to take that one, or?
Well, I don't know of a sort of a standard checklist that exists. I don't have one. I mean, I think it really depends on your process.
So they may have to develop their own if they don't already have one as part of their process.
Right.
Makes sense.
I'd have to agree with that. Just as we've indicated here, we come at this inventory question or this webinar from the standpoint that we want to talk about inventory. But as you've clearly seen, it depends on what is the purpose of your business? Are you government oriented? Do you have government contracts? Are you commercial? Are you in the academic community, working on grants and such and so forth? So really, what you've got to do with this inventory process is look at your organization and then sit down and think through this inventory as a process. What is the overall arching mission of that business? How is this inventory going to help support that mission? And even when it gets down to determining, okay, what is it that I need to do to work up in the way of a checklist, is part and parcel of that overall process development. Drawing up your spreadsheet. What is it that you have to look at? What is it you have to count? How frequently? How sensitive is the property? All of that counts, and it's got to be thought about before you get in there, not during.
So we have about 7 minutes left. I have one other question I kind of wanted to ask, and then maybe what we can do is open it up for the final amount of questions that we have. And this question will go to all of you. Where do you think the inventory process is headed in the future? With technology changing all the time, with processes constantly being improved, there seems like there's a lot of potential direction for where folks or institutions can take their inventory. So I just wanted to pose that to all three of you, and I will start with Chuck.
Well, I hate to keep hammering it, but it depends on the mission orientation that you've got. But I think, if you look at it from a commercial standpoint, what you want to do is you want inventory to be a seamless part of the operation. In other words, geez, we go through our, Walmart and such and so forth. Every time you buy something, the inventory is updated automatically, seamlessly. That's kind of far-fetched if you're a government contractor. But yet what you've got to look at is, if you're a government contractor, is to say, well, how can we do this process requirement at least cost but highest effectivity, with payback to lowering the amount of risk that the taxpayer, the government, has. And then finally, from an academic institution approach, how is that inventory? How can that be done with as little impact to the researcher, disruption to the day, but yet support that researcher to know where that item is, or does it still exist? Where is it when you need it? And the overall mission requirements of supporting that research mission. So again, you'd have to look at it depending on what the mission focus is.
And coming from a university that is so huge, being able to locate an asset with minimal interruption to the research being done and the PI is so critical, and we love it when it happens seamlessly like that. Tom, same question.
Powerful question. In the commercial world, I think competition will drive the need for physical inventory for more efficiency, and driven by more technology. We've seen blockchain in the news a lot lately. I don't know how that's going to affect physical inventory, but I imagine it will. So in the commercial world, greater efficiency in terms of practices to use of technology, that's how I see it. In the federal acquisition contracting world, the property world I live in, I think what's driving it is not so much changes in the physical inventory practices, it's the reason for the physical inventory practices. And we started out by saying, you know, we want your data, go do a physical inventory. And I just felt that was, well, I thought that was wrong. But those are the kinds of reasons we're seeing. There is uncertainty in GFP and what the government provided, and to remedy that, the first inclination that I've seen is that somebody needs to go conduct a physical inventory. So I see the rationale changing in the federal acquisition world. But I think a lot of what we talked about today are universal concepts. Just for giggles, I went out to Google and I typed in physical inventory practices, and I got 190 million hits. So it's not a dearth of content. Also, Defense Acquisition University has what we used to call, I think they still call this, Chuck, continuous learning module on physical inventory. And unless something changed, it's free, and anybody can take it.
You're right.
CLM 037, it's a physical inventory course. And I still remember it because I helped put it together, but like the first slide, we said, you need a plan. You don't start off your day by going, oh, okay, let's go do an inventory. And it don't work that way. You need a plan. You got to figure out what your plan is and what you hope to achieve. Like anything else, that's what managers do. So you go to dau.mil, you can probably find that course. I think it's just a simple matter of getting a login and so forth.
Sounds good. I definitely wrote that down.
Yeah, CLM 037. I'm looking online and it's still there, but I haven't gone into it in years, so I don't know. My guess is if they didn't play with it too much, it should still be good, because we tried to write these things so that they last, that they're not dated. We didn't put inventory of his Model T Ford in there or anything like that.
Thank you. I definitely think I definitely have noted it for myself. Brandon, same question.
Yeah, I would give a very similar answer. In the commercial realm, obviously technologies like RFID and things like that are making inventory more and more seamless, as Chuck said. As Tom said, in the government world, I almost feel like we're going backwards, and there's an instinct to just do wall to wall and have to see all that. So I think that, you know, contractors in that case and the government need to kind of work together on a culture change that says things like inventory by exception are acceptable. You know, things like risk-based inventories, statistical sampling inventories are acceptable, and, you know, something other than just this annual wall-to-wall concept that seems to be so prevalent.
And I'll just add to that, it is acceptable to DoD. If you look at the DoD Instruction 5064, there's a lot of language permitting those kinds of physical inventories. So I think a lot of the wall-to-wall thing is psychological, frankly. You know, so, oh my God, we don't know what to do. I need to sleep at night.
So I think we're just up against, it's just 10 o'clock or 10 o'clock Pacific time, so 1 o'clock Eastern. I'd like to go ahead and thank the panel for all of their insights throughout this last hour. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Danielle if there are any last questions for our panelists. But thank you very much for doing this panel with me.
You did a great job, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. There is no more questions. So just to back up what Scott said, I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy lives to do this. And I guess we will probably see you all at NES in August and possibly SES.
1 minute.
I will be there, and I will be discussing physical inventories. Just saying.
Holy smoke.
I'll see you
All
there.
right,
Definitely check out Tom's presentation on physical inventory at NES. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.